How's it going, guys? Akira here, and today we are going to be doing my retrospective and just talk about the Nintendo 64. But yeah, so basically, if you saw my last video, I did basically like a fifth generation retrospective, or re memory, like re going back to like memory lane, recap, whatever you want to call it. um, and I showed off the three consoles, that I at least that I have of that generation: the Nintendo 64, the PlayStation, and the Sega Saturn. And in there, I was, basically explaining my history throughout these consoles. A little bit of the history of, how the consoles, performed and how they were made, and which ones, what I liked about each console and what I disliked about each console. Um, and yeah, and in that video towards the end, I said that this one, out of those three consoles, this one was my least favorite out of them. And it's crazy because for the longest time growing up as a kid, this was my favorite console of all time. And it's like, wow, how did that turn out, to be your favorite console of all time? And now to the point where in that generation, out of those three, it's your least favorite. Which is funny because it's not bad, because that generation has like nine consoles. So this being the third place is not bad, because it's like, I've never owned or tried or played an Apple Pippin or like an Atari Jaguar or whatever the other consoles that came out in the generation that did not last, and they lasted, and that happened for a good reason, because I'm sure they suck. Um, but compared to, but I digress. But compared to the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation, why is it that I don't like these consoles as much as I like those? And how did this fall from my number one spot to the point where I don't even put it in my top 10? I generally would not even put it in my top 10 favorite consoles of all time. Well, it comes down to basically not nostalgia, because I did not grow up with this generation. In fact, I was born towards the trail end of this generation, moving into the new millennium. And I grew up basically with the PS3, the Wii, and the Xbox 360. That generation, the Nintendo DS, the PSP, the seventh gen. But yeah, but basically it was due to how do I say this? I said this in my last video, but right when the Wii was out, and the 360 and the PS3, the internet was finally a thing. I'm sure if you guys remember, old enough to remember, they had the Wii Shop channel, right? Digital marketplace. They had the 360 marketplace, which is another form of digital marketplace, and then there was a PS Network, the PlayStation Network marketplace for the PS3, which was also another digital store. And then, funny enough, the PSP had their digital store, and the Nintendo DSi had their digital store. But I'm talking mainly about the home consoles. Um, so throughout the Wii Shop channel, right, in their digital store, they had digital retro games through the virtual consoles. So they have stuff like from Nintendo NES, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, Genesis, TurboGrafx, Neo Geo, I believe, tons and tons of other ones. I think some arcade games too, maybe even Atari. I don't know. It's been a long time, and the store has been shut down, so I can't go back and see it. And I'm trying to memorize, remember from when I was a kid, everything that was in the Wii Shop channel, basically. But yeah, so throughout there, I would see stuff like Mario Kart 64. I'm like, whoa, this is an older Mario Kart than the Mario Kart Wii I'm playing. The original Smash Brothers. I was like, wow, there's an older version of Smash Brothers Brawl. Stuff like that. The OG Mario on NES, Super Mario Brothers 1. Was another one too. Kid Icarus, the OG Kid Icarus. I'm like, wow, this is the angel that's in Brawl. The guy I picked. Metroid, Super Metroid. Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers 3, Super Mario World, Zelda, the very first Zelda, Zelda Link to the Past, Castlevania 1, 2, and 3, and then the one on Super Nintendo. Things like that. So I was like, wow, I'm discovering a whole new world throughout the Wii Shop channel, the virtual console. And then I started, the retro. I'm like, wow, retro games from like the 80s, the 90s, the 70s, from an era that I was not, I was not alive back then. So, right, so basically throughout that, I was like discovering those games and playing them. And there was a while where I would love and prefer those games over the ones that were coming out now, or not prefer them, but it was more like, obviously, like playing OG Smash Brothers. I definitely preferred Brawl over it, but like it was more like an intrigue. I was like, wow, like ancient history, kind of like us. We look back at ancient history, like you know, we have such an affiliation with stuff like woolly mammoths and dinosaurs and stuff like that. Kind of like that. You're very interested. I'm like, wow, this is ancient things. Before before my time. Atari. Stuff like that. Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, all that stuff. So I would remember playing those stuff, and then so you have me playing them through the digital store on Wii, right? Then I would go over to um this, I guess, family friend, friend of family house, and we would play their Nintendo 64. And it was a black one with controllers, and we would play Mario Kart 64. I think it was Cruising USA, Rush, Yoshi Story, Diddy Kong Racing. I said Mario 64 or Mario Kart. Both of them. Either way, both of them. Stuff like that, and it's like, with the weird controller, I'll hold it weird because my hands were tiny, and I'm like, what the heck is this controller? But still have tons of fun with my brother, and then and and their and that families, sometimes their daughters, they were like way older than us. When we were kids, they were like teenagers going into their 20s. But anyway, so we would play. Sometimes it was us, and then sometimes it was with them, and it was like, wow. This is super cool. This is retro stuff from before my time, Mario Kart 64, So stuff like that affinity for that retro stuff. And then, I'm like, wow, this is my favorite console of all time. I don't know why. I'm just having so much fun with this, and I would love to go back to more retro stuff, compared to what was out at the time, the Wii, the 360, the DS, the PSP. And yeah, and don't even get me started when I played Ocarina of Time for the first time, and GoldenEye 007. But that quickly was my favorite game of all time for the longest time as a kid growing up. Ocarina of Time. But yeah, so it's crazy how I really like this console to a point that you would think I was born in the 90s and this was my console growing up as a kid, but it's like, no, I was born going into the 2000s, the very end of the 90s, and I grew up with the Wii and the 360 and the PS3 and that generation. So it's like, it's crazy how like that kind of influenced it. Just me discovering stuff through the digital store, and this will go in a separate video. But the same thing happened with the Xbox 360 marketplace, when I'll discover the OG Xbox stuff, and then PlayStation when I'll discover the OG PS1 stuff. But that'll be in the video for their respective consoles for those videos. Mainly want to focus on Nintendo through the X64. So yeah, so that was very cool thing. What was another thing I was gonna say? I remember also being like you would hear about the little things like you blow in the cartridge and then you put it back in. People say it doesn't work. People say that works. Stuff like retro YouTubers back in the day, like Angry Video Game Nerd. Even though mostly his content was like crappy NES games and stuff like that, sometimes they'll make like a video of him, James and Mike Monday, and sometimes they'll play like Nintendo 64 games, sometimes they'll play like OG PlayStation games, OG Sega Genesis games, NES games, stuff like that. So stuff like that would intrigue me as well. And the history of the 64. When I found out that this was this came out around the same time as the OG PS1, and what happened between Sony and Nintendo, how they were gonna make a console together, but then Nintendo betrayed Sony, blah blah blah. How Nintendo was the king of the 80s, and they were the king of the early 90s, even though they had a good rival with Sega, with the Sega Genesis. How they fell from grace with the N64 because they were too stubborn and they stuck with cartridges when everybody in the industry was telling them, please go with CDs like Sony is and Sega and everybody else. And so how they fell from grace through their stubbornness, stuff like that type of history very intrigued me. But yeah, speaking of the console, as you can see here, we have the ice blue console. It's very, very good looking console. This was back in the 90s where transparent things were very popular. Like Game Boys, you had your see-through purple Game Boys, your see-through blue Nintendo 64s. I know there's a jungle green. I know, even though PlayStation didn't come out with like a see-through thing, I know one of the controllers was like a see-through controller. I have a few of them. And stuff like that. So it was, the see-through era, super cool. I also have the normal black Nintendo 64, but I just wanted to show off the blue one here. And here's some. I know here would go the expansion pack. Some games that would require the expansion pack would go in here. Stuff like Majora's Mask, I believe Donkey Kong 64, and I think I think Banjo Tooie and Conker's Bad Fur Day. I may be mistaken on that one, but I remember hearing something about that. Here, you have the reset button, the power switch. It goes. I don't even. I forgot. Okay, on and off. It's been a while. And back here, you got the power brick, and then the AV cable, the 4 controller ports. So yeah, so some good things that this console did was, despite Nintendo falling from grace, alienating developers, and basically not holding that top spot anymore because Sony did. They did good things. So for example, this is a very fun party console. Like if you're having a party and want to have a local multiplayer, I would definitely how do I say this? I'll definitely suggest this console. Because the 4 controller ports, you play Mario Party or Mario Kart or Smash or Star Fox, GoldenEye. Even though I think that game hasn't aged well, and going back to GoldenEye feels not good. Let's be honest, not good. Screw it. Play it for the lows. I would definitely recommend this console over like the Saturn or the PlayStation when it comes to party games. But yeah, another thing that this console did right, even though it did with cartridges. One thing is cartridges do have shorter loading times. The PlayStation 1 and the Sega Saturn, when the loading screens, they're a bit longer. And depending on the game, some games take forever to load. Others, not as much. So that's one good thing that came out of cartridge. But unfortunately, this, even though I did not experience this because I wasn't around there, this made the cartridge games, more expensive than the CD based games on the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. So, for example, from looking back in old magazines, I would see that Sony games, like the PS1 games, they would go for $49.99, I believe it was. Meanwhile, Nintendo 64 cartridge based games would go for 60, maybe even 70. Like it was crazy seeing from the old school like Black Friday, Best Buy, or whatever magazines that I would see from the 90s. So I guess that was a bad thing. With the price and stuff. However accurately that is, I don't know. You guys that grew up in the era, correct me, comment down below if that was accurate or if I was just looking at like a magazine that was like doing like sales or whatever. Like reduction in price. But yeah, another good thing that this console is that since it's a cartridge-based consoles, these last forever. Well, not forever, but nothing lasts forever. But these last longer than CD-based consoles because there are less moving parts to break. It's just the motherboard and the cartridge. I don't know what you would call it. The thing that pops up for the cartridge and the on and off switch, and that's it. The power supply is a part. It's external power supply. So it's just less moving parts, less things to break. Meanwhile, in a CD based console like the Saturn and the PlayStation, you have the laser disc, you have the disc drive, you have to worry about this, and more moving parts and stuff like that. So that's one good thing about a cartridge based console. But that's just the nature of cartridge based console. I mean, I could say the same exact thing for the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. But yeah, so that's nothing too crazy to write home about. But yeah, let's moving on to the things that this console did wrong and things I don't like about this console. Well, cartridges. This is what made Nintendo fall from grace up until when they kind of came back with the Wii, and then they fell again with the with the Wii U, and then they're coming back again with the Switch. But it kind of made them move away. At least this and the GameCube made them move away from competing directly with the competition. Sony, Sega at this point, and eventually Microsoft. Which kind of sucks because I know I was gonna say this in a later video, but I guess I'll say it now. So Nintendo isn't known for the third parties anymore. This console does not have all the multiplats that Sony did with the PlayStation and Sega did with the Saturn. And then eventually, Sony would keep on moving on with the PS2, PS3, PS4, etc. And then Microsoft eventually, all those multi-plats will mostly come for all those other consoles. Um, and so this is basically just you would at this point you would just get Nintendo for Nintendo-based games. In the Super Nintendo era, you know, you would get Nintendo for the Nintendo-based games, and then they also had the better performing third-party games compared to the Sega Genesis because it was a stronger console than the Sega Genesis. So it's they were kings. They were on top because they had the best performing third parties, and then you had your Nintendo exclusives like Zelda and Mario and Fire Emblem and stuff like that, Kirby. Meanwhile, this one it's like you only get this for the Nintendo exclusives, and even not and not just the Nintendo. So I guess you would count Rare, with the Donkey Kong games and the Banjo games. But when it comes to third parties, this does not have a lot of JRPGs. I don't believe this has a lot of fighting games. Correct me if I'm wrong in that one, or at least well-known, worthwhile fighting games to play. Like there's Tekken on PlayStation, and there's Dead or Alive on Saturn and on PlayStation. And, the Marvel versus Capcom games I believe came out on both PlayStation and Saturn. Street Fighter, the Alpha games, Saturn and PlayStation. It came out on those, but it didn't come out on this. So that kind of hurts it, and I don't like that about it because, you always want each console manufacturer to do good. No matter which one is your favorite, no matter if you prefer Nintendo over PlayStation, PlayStation over Nintendo, Sega over Nintendo, Xbox or whatever. You always want each console maker to do good because more competition makes the better industry, and then it makes us the consumers winners because we get cheaper stuff, better stuff, stuff like that. But unfortunately, the Nintendo 64 didn't provide that unless you just wanted to play the first party stuff. And then another thing too that I did not like about this, which I guess is a reason, or goes to one of the reasons why this went from my favorite console of all time to like not even in my top 10, is that, and this is not just a Nintendo 64 thing, it's a fifth generation thing. So this includes the Saturn and this includes the PlayStation and any other console that generation. Games haven't aged that well for this generation, and I notice it more, or at least I personally feel it more with the 64. Like for some reason, Mario 64 feels like more frustrating and clunky to go back to, and same thing with GoldenEye 007. Those two games feel more frustrating and clunky going back to than like Silent Hill or Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 2 on PlayStation. I don't know, they just do it. It's a very strange thing. I know some people would argue the other way. Some people say Resident Evil 1 and 2 and Silent Hill 1 on PlayStation 1, they feel more clunkier than Mario 64, GoldenEye 007 in here. But either way, regardless, all those games, they obviously haven't aged well, and that's why, a lot of these games, they need remasters, or they've already got remasters or remakes because, look at the Resident Evil 2 remake that they come out with. I know they made a remake / remaster of GoldenEye 007 called GoldenEye 007 Reload, I believe, on the Wii and the 360 and the PS3, things like that. So, and like I said in my previous video, if you were to put Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, 3D World, or Mario Odyssey in front of me, I would rather pick any of those games over Mario 64. I just would. It's just unfortunate how it is. The game hasn't aged well. It's not fun. Well, I mean, it is fun, but it's like as I'm playing it, and it's like the clunky cameras and the weird controls, I'm like, I'd just rather play like Odyssey or Galaxy or Sunshine. I don't know. It's just the nature. Same thing with Smash. I would rather be playing Brawl, Melee, Ultimate, Smash Wii U over Smash 64. I just would. And the same thing with Mario Kart. As much as I really like Mario Kart 64, I would rather play Double Dash or Mario Kart Wii. Just being honest. I'm not saying these games are bad. It's just unfortunately a product of its time that they haven't aged well. But yeah, so that's another thing I dislike about that console, and I guess the other reasons why it's not my favorite console anymore, and it's my least favorite console out of those three. But yeah, another thing I was gonna say before I go is that for a while collecting for these consoles, it was very expensive because people that grew up with this console, they got nostalgic and they started buying everything back from their childhood. But as I'm starting to see now, it's slowly but surely going down. For example, Diddy Kong Racing at one point was like a $30-$40 game. Now it's gone back to like I see like an 18 to 20. Um, Mario Kart 64 for the longest time was like a $50 game. Now I've seen it winding down to like 40, 35 maybe. But then there are some games that stay up in price. Akira of Time, I think it hit the $50 threshold and it's staying up there. I haven't seen it go back down. Mario 64, I think I've seen it gone back down a bit. And then some of like the other like shovelware type third party games or um, filler games, you want to call it, they're going back down. So it's like I feel like people are getting like, okay, they got the nostalgia itch, they played it, they had their fun, they're like, okay, I mean, that was fun for a while, and then they're selling everything, they're trying to get rid of it back. So I see that this is going down a bit. But to be honest, I don't how do I say this? I don't see some of those rare like games going back. Like for example, Clay Fighter, like that game's still gonna stay like however much that game is. Isn't it like over 500 or whatever the heck it is? Maybe I'm pulling the number out of my butt, but it's some crazy expensive number. And that's just not the fault for this console. The fifth generation is kind of like that. For example, PS1, real quick, all the third party filler games, like the sports games, the racing games, all that stuff that was mass produced, those stuff are still cheap. But the stuff that's gone up are like the Japanese RPG games, the horror games, some shoot 'em up games. Those are stuff that on PlayStation and also on Sega Saturn, they're still keeping their price up. And then don't even get me started on Sega Saturn. Everything in Sega Saturn is expensive, unless you import from Japan and it's cheaper because only 10 or 20% of the library came out in North America. But anyways, so that's things about this generation, and this console specifically that I kind of find it kind of just kind of like turns me off from that. Another thing I will say is that as much as I like this console and I kind of don't like it as much, because of that reason I don't collect for this console. I generally don't. If I'm being completely honest with you, I only have a few physical games for this console, and then the rest of them are either on the Wii Chop channel, on the virtual console for the Wii Chop channel digitally, or they're in my Wii U virtual console. So so in the Wii virtual console, the Wii U virtual console, and then the Nintendo Switch online service, whatever, or emulated, or just emulated on my gaming laptop or on my Steam Deck. That's where most of my games that are on, because it just makes it very difficult to collect for, and it's just a console that I don't want to deal with the controller. I don't like the controller. I'm gonna be honest, I don't like the controller. Really dislike it. And usually everything that I've played, everything that I wanted to play, I've already played on this console. So I guess there's no interest for me pursuing and having interest in this console. As for example, I don't want to do more comparisons as I've already am, because I want to make this Nintendo 64 centric video. But compared to the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation, I'm still discovering new games on those consoles till this day. I'm like, wow, this is a cool game. This existed in this console. I didn't know that. Let me try that out. And in those consoles too, I'm also more keen into wanting to collect for physically. Obviously, they have their rare stuff that are like a bazillion dollars. For example, Panzer Dragoon Saga on the Sega Saturn. That game is like over $1,000. You have some of like the very rare obscure PlayStation 1 games. Those are like in the multi-hundreds, $300, $400, $500 games. I'm not getting them physically because it's just not smart to. So those in those rare scenarios where the game is like over $500 or whatever, or even over like $200, $100, that's where I emulate. But most of the stuff is still reasonable, so I like to collect for and discover stuff. So I guess that's one thing I have. That's one point against this console. But other than that, I hate to leave it on a sour note. I'm sure everybody thinks, loves this console, grew up with it. But I do think that it's a lot of nostalgia stuff. And this is coming from someone who did not grow up with it, so I don't have that nostalgia. and then I ended up liking it from going back as a as a 2010s kid, and then being my favorite console of all time, and then realizing its flaws after that honeymoon phase, and then it's no longer my favorite console, and to the point where I don't even touch it. I don't even turn it on, to be honest. And it's for rare occasions when we want to specifically play this. Um, but yeah, let me know what you guys think. Is this your favorite console of all time? Tell me in the comments why I'm wrong and why this thing is the greatest thing ever created and in mankind since sliced bread. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Do you guys like the Nintendo 64? What's your favorite game for this console? I've said it in the last video, but I'll say it again. My favorite game for this console is Ocarina of Time. But yeah, peace.